Tuolla Lontoossa Jennin mä kohtasin. Väki, oho. Hän on neidosten joukossa kaunihin. Väki, oho.
Welcome again to another adventure of the Gloucester Bookies. On my right, not usually on the right, but there he is.
No, yeah.
He's there, George Rosen, who, you know, and on my left, I suppose you're all right, you're appropriately situated. Raymond Henan from Lanesville. Professor Henan will be going first on our show. I'm Wayne Soini, and we're going to be discussing beginnings today. And our theme is beginnings of writings, beginnings of books, beginnings. And I think I'm going to touch on the beginning of the universe, by the way.
Okay.
Epic. Anyway, here we go. Raymond first is going to describe, what are you going to describe? He's beginning. He's the one.
Well, thank you, and it's great to be here again, and hello to everyone listening. As soon as you mentioned, beginnings, and you were going to be scientific, there's I didn't see it in time, but apparently there's a special edition of Scientific American magazine that talks about the new ideas on the beginnings of the universe and how it's being treated in the press, which I hadn't seen that special issue. So, apropos beginnings, I found this quote that the beginning of literature is, according to at least 2 or 3 authors, including Keats and a poet, but also a favorite of yours, Kurt Vonnegut, and also, many others would say that the Iliad or the Aeneid is the birth of at least Western literature. And here's a quote, you know how European literature begins? With a quarrel. All of European literature springs from a fight. And then our professor picked up a copy of the Iliad and read out to the class the opening lines. Divine muse, sing of the ruinous wrath of Achilles. Begin with a quarrel, Agamemnon, the king of men, and the great Achilles. And that's all I'll read about that. But it's also interesting that, and I did not know this, that in 1472, the first book printed in English was the Iliad, or a version of it, the story of Troy, published in 1472. So unless you consider the Bible a book, which apparently this in 1472 it was not considered a book, so it did not get that honor of being the first book published in English. So
I heard that it was a porn book that was lost to history after it came out.
Okay, well, it's really interesting because I am going to talk about 2 books that
just
deal.
a brief point. It was extremely dangerous to print
the Bible
in English. So
yes.
That's why it lagged behind.
Yes.
Because
I'm going to talk about 2 modern books that are sort of they take their starting point with the Trojan War, the Song of Achilles, in which by Madeline Miller, which was nominated for shortlisted for the Pulitzer Prize, the National Book Award, and also the winner of the Orange Prize for fiction.
Clue people in immediately if it's a translation or sort of a retelling.
This is, I would say, a retelling from the point of view of 2 characters, and then the other is The Silence of the Girls, a novel by Pat Barker, which was shortlisted for the Booker Prize. And like Hilary Mantel, she was one of the few women who were more than once nominated for the Booker Prize, although unlike Hilary Mantel, she did not win it twice. But before I do that, I want to also talk about beginnings, famous beginnings of literature, and that is opening lines, and I'm going to see if either of you know them. I'm sure you'll all do very well, but I am going to read some opening lines.
Can we consult?
Absolutely, absolutely. These are easy. Well, four of them are easy. All happy families are alike. Each unhappy family is unhappy in its own way.
It's Anna Karenina.
Absolutely.
Leo Tolstoy.
And last week, or last time, Susie Natty read to us the ending of that book, I believe. Did she know it?
Yeah, we went on endings. So
yes, and so I want to tell you a little bit about Anna Karenina, because for many, many years it was my favorite book. I would tell people it's my favorite book, and in fact I used to carry a copy of it with me and visited the 5 campuses of the 5 colleges in western Massachusetts in the Pioneer Valley, and I introduced Anna Karenina to many famous people, or semi-famous people. In terms of my book, I introduced Christopher Peck, who was the son of Gregory Peck, who was going to Amherst College, and he was fascinated by the stories I told him about Anna Karenina. And then I also introduced Anna Karenina to Christopher Power, the son of Tyrone Power, who was at school also at Amherst College, Madeline Albright, who was at, I was at a seminar at Mount Holyoke College, and I brought along my book of Anna Karenina. I was so taken by the book, I had read that there was an excellent French translation, and so what I did, I decided to talk about...
Wait a minute.
Yes.
To make this plausible, you've got to help me. Madeline Albright comes to speak at a college, and this stranger to her
Yes,
comes
yes.
up out of the audience.
Yes.
Holding Anna Karenina. How do you get her to pay any attention to you?
Oh well, it wasn't difficult at all. I just added up, and I went right up to the dais, and I asked her if she had she ever met Anna Karenina, and she said, "No, I haven't." She said, "I've read about her," and I said, "Well, she's right here." I said, "In French and in English," and she was quite taken with.
I'm astounded. Anyway,
and,
you really did the ice. What about Elizabeth Taylor? Did you introduce?
No. I knew you were going to say that, but. What's interesting is I did find out that Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton once had an option to do a film of Anna Karenina with Richard Burton as Count Vronsky, of course, and but it didn't get to. Richard Burton had found a script. That was based on the original Anna Karenina, that is the original movie with Greta Garbo.
A silent film, I suppose.
No, it was 1936, I think.
Okay.
So it was. But I knew you were going to ask, so I had to look up and see. Okay. All right, how do I tie this in with Elizabeth Taylor? All right, well, okay, let's get on to the next one. But I thought you would be amused by this introduction to these people.
Well,
and,
obviously, a lot of Hollywood connections.
This is fantastic.
From the Pioneer Valley to the Pioneer Valley must be where Hollywood sends its children.
And
I never walked around with my favorite book, A Connecticut Yankee and King Arthur's Court, and invited people's attention.
Someone else, Arthur Ashe. When I met him at that
Tennis World
meets Anna Karenina. I sat down next to this gentleman whom I did not know at the time was Arthur Ashe, the tennis player, and I had.
But you knew he'd be needing advice about Eric.
Well, I didn't know that at all. I just said it was the only seat at the counter. Well, that's not quite true, but I sat there, and fortunately, I did have a copy of Tennis Magazine, World Tennis, which is no longer published.
Oh, so you had Anna Karenina in one hand and tennis in tennis.
Okay. And it worked out, that's very fortuitous. So, but I forgot one other thing, that Gregory Peck's son told me that he was friends with Prince Albert, who was also at Amherst College at the same time, and which you
I
knew.
call up the
and he said
shop
that-
and I say, let Prince Albert out of the can.
Stop. So what he told me, to tie it in with famous actresses and other people, he said that Prince Albert had told him once that
Now, which Prince?
the son of Princess Grace, Princess Grace
of Monaco. So
yes, sorry.
Okay.
And
I was going back to the guy in the
Oh,
can.
dear.
You know, Victoria's husband.
Okay, that's what I was going to
And
say.
I hadn't
Perhaps I should
quite
have been more.
thought they were that old. These
So,
people. Okay, all right. Yes, Monaco.
He told me that Prince Albert had said that his mother, Grace Kelly, had always wanted to play Anna Karenina, but that it was never in the cards. But that if she had come back and made a comeback, and Alfred Hitchcock was after her to do a comeback, that maybe a great script about Anna Karenina would do this. So that's my story. That's all about all happy families are alike. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife.
It's Pride and Prejudice.
Excellent.
Austin.
Excellent.
Now the next one, I think Wayne will get. Well, perhaps you
I
both will.
want to see if this streak continues.
Oh, this
It's already up
happened.
to $64.
Okay,
The next will be
okay.
$128.
Okay. All of this happened, more or less.
All of this happened more or less.
No, I don't know.
Kurt Vonnegut.
Excellent.
Okay.
Slaughterhouse
That's
Five.
the beginning.
Okay, and so to tie this in, he's one of the authors who claimed that, he said it was the Aeneid was the first book in English literature, or
By the
European
way,
literature,
the
sorry.
Slaughterhouse Five book that we get
Yes.
from Kurt Vonnegut
Yes.
is not the first Slaughterhouse Five. It is after 30 earlier beginnings or attempts. So therefore, it's the 31st edition or issue or attempt at.
Excellent, because
Okay,
I was
it's
about
not
to
the
say.
beginning.
Well, I was just about to say that.
But it has a beginning.
I was going to
has a
say,
beginning.
now, I
Yes.
don't know, regarding
Yeah.
beginnings, I was about to say, as you just said, now, I don't know if the book as we know it was his first attempt at the book or his last.
You don't know. I know.
No, well, that's what I'm saying, that, so it
Now we
could
all
both
know.
be a beginning and an end. Anyways, but, so his themes,
That's what my books have, beginnings, middles, and ends.
okay,
That's
But
right.
not
well,
necessarily in that order, as
And not as-
Jean-Luc Godard said
And not,
about.
as, and not as good as not as good as Vonnegut's.
well, he
either.
also said,
But-
I believe,
Yeah.
correct me if I'm wrong, he said, a good sentence must do two things.
Make
Okay.
the author money, and what else?
No, you didn't say that. Reveal character or advance the action. And I wanted to mention Kurt Vonnegut
that's
because
true.
to tie him back into the Aeneid, because he has themes of war, free will, and death, all of which are part of these two novels, and of course the Iliad.
War, death, and what?
Free will.
Nobody's got love in there? Jeez, he missed a chance.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting because I am going to bring that up again when I talk about the Silence of the Girls, if I have
right.
time.
Yeah.
Another famous opening is, sorry.
Raymond, you're not at the beginning of the end, but you are at the end of the beginning. Okay, go
Okay.
ahead.
It was inevitable that the scent of almonds always reminded him of the fate of an unrequited love.
Oh, no,
Good.
I remember the scent of almonds, but I can't place it.
Goethe on Sorrows of Young Werther.
Well, that's a very good guess. Love in the Time of Cholera by
okay.
Garcia
Yeah,
Marquez.
I knew it was Garcia Marquez.
And
Which
again,
one? So,
that I picked that one because of the theme of memory.
You can do two more.
Proust
and love,
and
too, just as Wayne was pointing out. That's
we
got
gotta do it.
Yeah.
Give us two more. Go ahead.
All right. It was a queer, sultry summer. The summer they electrocuted the Rosenbergs, and I didn't know what I was doing in New York City.
I'm guessing it could be Ragtime, but no. What is
That's a good guess.
That
but it's
kid,
not.
the one where J.D. Salinger's.
Good. Also a very good guess. It is Sylvia Plath.
She only wrote one book, and that's
That's
it.
it, yeah.
No, I
And
never
then
read it. Never read
I'm going to end with, on the theme of memory also, this is the saddest story I have ever heard.
Some cat book.
That one doesn't even ring a bell.
That is The Good Soldier by Ford Maddox Ford. And I chose that one because there is a line in both of these books about this being the saddest story that they had ever heard, but in the retelling thereof.
I don't want sad story. I'd rather have Good Soldier Dwight. Remember Good Soldier Dwight?
No.
That was a good one. Isn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
Well, what's interesting is that the book may not have lived up to that story, but it does have to do with infidelity, as
Betrayal.
and betrayal,
Sure.
which also come in to these two books.
Right.
Well, how are we doing for time?
You've got 5 minutes.
5 minutes. Then I will do one more, which this is arcane, but I'll read it anyhow. The sky above the port was the color of a television turned on to a dead channel.
The Happy Holsters go to camp, was it?
That is Henry Dorset's, the story of Henry Dorset case. The book is The Neuromancer by William Gibson, the only book to ever win both the Hugo Award for literary science fiction and the Philip K. Dick Award for popular science fiction and or mystery. And it's the only one which
don't even know the author.
And it is a book with an anti-hero who is a drug addict and a cyberspace hacker. And the Russians find out about him and believe that he's responsible for him having hacked into their private files. And so they poison him so that his memory is affected. But instead of ruining his memory, it increases his memory. Anyways, that's a famous book that I wanted to sort of bring, instead of being totally literary, I thought I'd just throw that one in. So what do these all have to do? And I did try to tie them into the retelling, because we talked about the beginnings of that, the Iliad being the birth, if you will, of European literature or Western literature. And its influences, of course, are still felt to this day, including these two very popular bestsellers, which are takeoffs on the Iliad. One is the Song of Achilles, which is a beautifully written book by Madeline Miller, in which she retells the story, but from the point of view of Patroclus, in her opinion, the lover of Achilles. And she retells almost every major scene in the Iliad from the point of view of this man who was in love with Achilles, and including the fact, which I had forgotten, that in terms of women having been ignored throughout most of Western literature, that I had forgotten that Briseis was a very important source of the story in the Iliad, and because she was the royal princess who was captured at the fall of, after a battle before the fall of Troy. She was captured, and by a Greek general, who then in turn gave this royal female to Agamemnon, and he was quite taken with her, and kept her, of course, along, even though he was married. But he was forced by Apollo to give her up in order that he could be forgiven for his infidelity. So he passed her along to Achilles. And Achilles was very taken with her, although at the same time, according to this book, that made Patroclus jealous. Then, and I'm sure you both know this, the crux of the story in the Iliad was that Achilles had to give up Briseis back to Agamemnon, and so Achilles withdrew from the siege of Troy, causing a great deal, many soldiers had to die because he refused to fight. So I use this wonderful retelling, which is beautifully written. It's also, in a different way, the subject of the silence of the girls. Now, who are the girls in her story? The girls are the female characters who are mentioned in the Iliad, but who, despite having an important role to play, such as Briseis is only given like 9 lines in the Aeneid, and yet she was one of the fulcrums she was the prime reason why Achilles did not participate in the siege of Troy in the beginning, and why it was protracted. But we know so little about her, hence the silence of the girls and the other girls, some of whom were goddesses. It's a very literary retelling. As I mentioned, Pat Barker, she was shortlisted for the Booker Prize, which she had previously won. And I tied this into Hilary Mantel, who did win the Booker Prize twice, the only author to do so. And Pat Barker nearly did the same, but she was only shortlisted. She did not win it. Now, what's really interesting is that she takes the opening line of the Iliad, but sort of rewrites it herself.
That's 5 minutes.
Well, can I have 1 more minute?
Yes, you may.
Great Achilles, brilliant Achilles, shining Achilles, godlike Achilles. How the epitaphs do pile up. We never call him any of those things. We, meaning the gods of these girls, we called him the butcher.
All right. Hey, before I pass the...
You did very well with those opening lines.
Well, no.
You did.
Only for the books I read. I have managed, even when I was a concentrator or, majoring in American history and literature, and certainly should have read Ford Madox Ford. I never did.
You didn't miss anything. Anyway, the thing I wanted before I pass the torch to you, George, is Raymond has stimulated my mind to remember something, and you solved the mystery for me in Shakespeare studies. Shakespeare wrote one play about the Trojan War.
Excellent.
It was Troilus and Cressida.
Yes.
In Troilus and Cressida, mysteriously, inexplicably, but now I can explain.
Yes.
There's a character called Antenor. Not antenna. Antenor. Antenor. He's listed in the cast. He's in the, stage directions. Antenor and certain others walk in front of him. He has not a single line. Not a single line. He's totally mute. Now the question, why would you have the character on here at all? Is it to have some walk-on, some extra that gets a little exposure time, like Prince Albert or something? Or what? You answered it. Antenor is the father of Briseis,
Yes.
who isn't given enough words to speak in the original. And Shakespeare's big on daughters. His last plays were fathers and daughters, daughters and fathers. And he was saying, I think, in a silent way, a totally implicit way, only known to him and now to us and those that are listening, Antenor is punished by coming on in a big play that was popular in his time, multiple printings, unable to speak. Essentially, all lines denied him. So the daughter, Briseis, in the Greek, has more lines than Antenor, her father, has in the English in the Royal Precedent. Totally silent. And that answers my question.
Okay, that's great that you mentioned that, because in fact, as scholars had pointed out, that Briseis had disappeared from history and literature for 1,000 years, and then had reappeared with Chaucer and then with Shakespeare. But Shakespeare actually confused Briseis with, that is, Cressida was confused with Briseis. In fact, because they actually were the same person because of a misunderstanding of the translation.
Yeah.
So that's really fascinating. That
Right. We don't want to confuse anyone with Cressida and Briseis.
Oh my
You
God.
proceed
but
with-
let's move on to George.
Well,
Proceed, please.
Okay. When I thought of beginnings, I'm thinking, well, I was thinking part of opening sentences, but I was thinking of opening situations too, and a certain more kind of down-to-earth technical view, which are openings I like and also openings I've written
Yes.
myself. And it has to, in part, to do with curiosity and mystery. I mean, you were saying about, who is this mysterious person? Like I have, this is slight, I'll go tangential in my fourth sentence. I have a friend who is now a woman, a retired Episcopal minister, but who had been a professor of classics at Carleton College for many years, and then wrestled with a drinking problem and dealt with that and switched to the clergy from being a classics professor and stuff. But she had always, and this is a mystery, which I will explain why I'm very interested in something which was mysterious to her. She wrote her thesis on Helen of Troy. And the fairly extensive literature there is of Helen of Troy, not just in Homer, all these other things. But, so with great joy, I found her thesis and realized to my horror that since this was addressed to an academic audience of Greek scholars, that anything in Greek was not translated. So she would describe something, my friend would describe something as, this fascinating vision of what Helen is appears, and there'd be a block of Greek in which, less little Latin and less Greek, or, who was turning. So, but that I have always been extremely curious as to what these mysterious portions have been. So what grabs me in reading things is a mysterious situation. And it can sometimes involve opening sentences, and sometimes it doesn't involve opening sentences. And I'll give some examples in a minute. I will also call in at this point the great literary critic, Canadian, you would call it cultural critic, to Northrop Frye, who I heard deliver a whole bunch of lectures, which then incorporated in a book, where he was talking about sort of if-then stories, or it was if-therefore stories and then stories.
Are those three different?
No, they were just two different kinds. The if-then were saying if you have this bunch of characters, sort of hence something, throw them together and think about these. And Henry James, he would throw that. There were also, and there are antecedents in storytelling going way back further. And the and then stories were classically the romance, which is what he was talking about. And he was talking about Roman and Greek romances, versions of which go on forever. And they're basically, the baby gets kidnapped by the pirates and then descends into the underworld or some wildly things, and all sorts of things happen. And what happens? And then the bear jumps out of the forest, and then this stuff. And that's the kind of story that is always. You don't have to choose, obviously, between these kinds of stories, but I like and then stories, which, in a certain sense, the Anna Karenina opening sentence is describing a characterological situation. Is, we're going to hear about an unhappy family, I assume, because why would he start that way and then just tell us about some happy family? We're going to be bored out of our gourd. And he does. He tells us a story about an unhappy family. Okay, so there. But in the opening sentences, again, you can have a fascinating opening sentence to both a situation, a bunch of characters, but also to a strange event. I enjoy the strange events. I also enjoy, tangent again, I like Once Upon a Time.
Yeah.
Because it throws me into a world of a campfire or, a 5 cavemen around a fire trying to,
tell a story.
Tell a story and pass the time. And, the Iliad, we have the wrath of Achilles and stuff, but we have the Sing O Muse, which is a kind of invocation of endless storytelling. This is going to be the story, so you can tell this is going to be a story of some kind. And weird modern versions of that, which I was just thinking of when you are saying the Slaughterhouse-Five beginning with more or less, was, you take the great, strange introduction of 3 words of Call Me Ishmael.
Yes, that was...
But it's not my name is Ishmael. It's Call Me Ishmael. So what's going on there?
Yes.
That's a little
that.
disturbing and curiosity.
The ambiguity,
and stuff. Is he talking about Isaac and Ishmael, or what is this story going to be? And that interests me. And the more modern version of that is a book which I haven't just thinking about listening now, and I hadn't thought about for 20 years, which is The End of the Road by John Barth. And the opening sentence of that is, in a sense, I am Jacob Horner.
That's right.
And I always thought that was just just dynamite. Way to begin a book, which is sort of like the Call Me Ishmael, but it's a more
eerie.
Contemporary, eerie. Melville would have never said, in a sense, that's in the 19th century. That was not a kind of thing to
in
say.
Spanish and German and all these other languages, often, isn't it? I call myself.
That's how you say my name is.
I call myself Ishmael. In a sense, I'm Ishmael.
And I had that as if we need to more time. That
Spanish
was
or-
gonna-
or-
no, call me Ishmael.
Okay.
And also it introduces, to me, maybe you'll disagree, but it introduces possibly the idea of an unreliable narrator, as some of these others that I already talked about, including, this is the saddest story I've ever heard.
I still think that's a great one for a cat book.
Why do you say that?
You figure my cat, that I love my cat, and then finally the cat is gonna talk to the cat. That would be the saddest
Really?
thing.
I think this is a much deeper story, Wayne, than a cat story, isn't it?
It depends on the respect and
That you have for your cat.
admiration you have for cats. Yeah.
But because, in fact, it's told, in talking about the unreliable narrator, there are two couples who meet after the war, and they were affected by another man. They all knew this other man who had been in the war, but they all have different viewpoints of him. But their marriages, again, so again, this idea of maybe unhappy families, these two successful, supposedly on the surface, successful couples. There was supposedly, and again, not supposedly, because the author makes it clear, that there was adultery on behalf of both of those couples with this other character, the so-called good soldier.
Peyton Place, and then. But George,
yes.
we gotta get into your stuff that you're writing, or what do you want to talk about?
Well, when I'm holding on to the string here. Well, I was going to start with two beginnings. I mean, as I said, what I'd like both to start actually writing from is a mysterious situation, and also reading. And I'm going to read two, and these are not my own, though I have them. One is from a book which I think I mentioned, I've mentioned in conversation in the past month or two. It may have been on television here, or not. A book by Penelope Fitzgerald, who's a wonderful British writer.
You said every story she has a ghost.
Oh yeah, yes, that's
Very
my novel.
wonderful.
She has a ghost in absolutely every story, and she wrote a book called The Gate of Angels, which, I'll read the first. There are two beginnings to it, which is kind of cool. So here's the genuine first paragraph. How could the wind be so strong, so far inland, that cyclists coming into the town in the late afternoon looked more like sailors in peril? This was on the way into Cambridge, up Mill Road, past the cemetery and the workhouse. On the open ground to the left of the willow trees had been blown. On the open ground to the left, the willow trees had been blown, driven and cracked until their branches gave way and lay about the drenched grass, jerking convulsively and trailing cataracts of twigs. The cows had gone mad, tossing up the silvery weeping leaves, which were suddenly quite contrary to all their experience everywhere within reach. Their horns were festooned with willow boughs. Not being able to see properly, the cows tripped and fell. 2 or 3 of them were wallowing on their backs, idiotically exhibiting vast-tailed bellies intended by nature to be always hidden. They were still munching, a scene of disorder, treetops on the earth, cow legs in the air, and a university city devoted to logic, reason.
Wonderful irony at the end. And world turned upside down on the way. Beautiful.
Okay. So we sort of follow this for a while. It's really, it's a really windy day in Cambridge. It's so windy that the cows are being blown over. Now, that without the cows would just be, it's a windy day in Cambridge.
Right.
But what kind of wind is so powerful as to knock over
that
cows?
Image, yes.
Right. So, and we go on she goes on for about 30 pages, still with that. And then all of a sudden, we are turned in, and I think this is dropped out of the...
It's another story entirely.
We switch away all of a sudden to a hospital room in which one character who was also cycling in the wind.
Right. Right.
At the very beginning, who we've started to learn something
these people
about.
were blown down by the same wind.
Yeah, well, all of a
Perhaps.
sudden,
Yeah.
he wakes up in
Yeah.
kind of, when Fred came to, he felt terribly thirsty. He's in a hospital room. Surely if it was halftime, they'd come and give him a bit of lemon. He's confused. He doesn't know what's happened. He may be playing football or whatever. Something was buoying him up, preventing him from feeling the pain, which he knew was everywhere waiting for him. He was in bed on a yielding mattress, which showed that wherever he was, it couldn't be in the college. The room seemed to breathe. Something, anyway, was breathing. It was quietly lit, but enough to throw on a wall papered with unknown flowers the shadows of an unknown washstand with its jug and basin. Over him, there was a white quilt and a white counterpane. It was very like a nursery. On top of the white counterpane, 6 inches away from him, he could see the left hand of a young woman, large and clean, with a broad gold ring on the 4th finger. He put out his hand and touched it. The gold was smooth, the skin felt rough. Her face was turned away, but he could see a quantity of hair, a wealth of hair, his mother would call it, brownish or between red and brown, done up at the moment. Her eyes were shut. My God, what luck, he thought. So he wakes up in bed
With Maybelle.
with a married woman. He's not married. As it turns out, this is Daisy, and we'll learn more and more about Daisy. But these two people were both riding their bicycles 30 pages after the first windy thing, because it was actually a few hours later. They crash into each other. They're both unconscious on the road, and the people picking them up assume that they're husband and wife and put them in a hospital bed together.
It is.
And then the story marches on more from there. And it's the whole thing is well worth reading. But that's the thing, kind of start
No,
that to me I love, absolutely
Let
love.
me just advertise it one more minute because it's worth people's understanding. I'm sure the Sawyer Free Library has for free copies of this, which is an anthology.
This has
get
three
so many copies,
three different
so many
three
stories
different novels
in the same volume from this Penelope Fitzgerald,
who herself
recommended-
is a Booker Prize winner, and
Yes.
I was introduced to her when I was in my 60s by a friend of mine I met in the Peace Corps in Africa, but who ended up being an English professor in Oregon. And he recommended.
It's like one of those books you would take with you to Africa if you had nothing else to read for a year.
And also, she didn't publish anything of note, or even try to publish anything of note, until she was about 62.
Yeah.
And she kept on going until she was about 87.
Love it.
So that's
all right.
That's encouraging to the old folks.
Old folks that are most of our audience.
When I first saw and laid eyes upon that book, I couldn't see the title, and it reminded me of a book that I first saw in a bookstore in Amherst. That was a translation of early stories of Balzac. And I thought, how fascinating. And I said, he's going to talk about the first books that Balzac wrote, which were very popular in his lifetime, but are no longer so.
Yeah.
Well, the book, I mean, the actual physical book, which this is a plug, I hope it still exists. It's a compendium because there's 3 novels in it, but it's in the Everyman's Library.
I was just going to say, it's like an Everyman. Yes.
I mean, both, they're all spectacular books, but they're just, I mean, the substance of them, but the actual physical substance of them is just wonderful. And they used to be, at least.
Yeah. And
cheap.
if you ignore even new cheap, but these days with people's estates and everything that they don't read, and so we've got chances on eBay or Amazon used books to buy copies for $5 that last forever and have 3 priceless novels. And go ahead.
Yeah, I think I got this old. Yeah, there's one more, but as I said, so that was a great kind of my ideal beginning.
Go ahead, please.
And I liked the whole book. This is going to be a book where the beginning was absolutely spectacular in the sense I'm talking about beginnings, but I didn't actually like the whole book.
Oh, no.
But I certainly read through it, and it
Jealous.
kept me.
Jealous.
I mean, the great difficulty, both as a writer and a reader, is to keep the reader going.
Yep.
I mean, if you start too lousy, or you're not going to give the reader the incentive to continue. This is a book by another British writer, Ian McEwan, which is called Enduring Love. The beginning is simple to mark. We were in sunlight under a turkey oak, partly protected from a strong gusty wind. Wind again. I was kneeling on the grass with a corkscrew in my hand, and Clarissa was passing me the bottle, a 1987 Dumas Gassac. This was the moment, this was the pinprick on the time map. I was stretching out my hand, and as the cool neck and the black foil touched my palm, we heard a man's shout. We turned to look across the field and saw the danger. Next thing, I was running toward it. The transformation was absolute. I don't recall dropping the corkscrew or getting to my feet or making a decision or hearing the caution Clarissa called after me. What idiocy to be racing into this story and its labyrinths, sprinting away from our happiness among the fresh spring grasses by the oak. There, a brief hop away from the actual story. There was the shout again and a child's cry, enfeebled by the wind that roared in the tall trees along the hedgerows. I ran faster, and there suddenly from different points around the field, 4 other men were converging on the scene, running like me. I see us from 200 feet up through the eyes of the buzzard we had watched earlier, soaring, circling, and dipping into the tumult of the currents. 5 men running silently toward the center of a 100-acre field. And what they're seeing all of a sudden is a hot air balloon with a child in it by himself, which has broken away from its moorings and is going up carrying this little kid. And there's one of the 5 men who rush toward it is grabbing a rope hanging down from it, and he gets lifted up by it.
Right.
And he gets killed.
Oh, geez.
He dies. The kid survives.
Yeah.
He kind of
Yeah.
gets carried off in the end. And the rest of the book is about these people who kind of ran into each other, trying to help the kid, and stuff. And it's to me, it's just kind of astounding. That makes me want to know what happened, and then question mark.
Yeah, I like that.
What happened, and it actually shifts into a very characterological, therefore,
All right.
kind of book after it. And what strikes, I mean, again, I've always found that to be interesting as a reader, and I'm not going to read. It starts,
I have to tell you, now also when I saw that, my mind runs rampant over reality. That reminded me of the recently, perhaps you both have heard of this, the prayer book, the so-called lost prayer book of Mary Stuart, which is suddenly reappeared. It never was really lost. But it's interesting because it ties in with the story I was going to tell also in terms of beginnings. I was going to talk about James I and James VI of England and the start of the Tudor reign, and he carried with him a leather copy of Mary Stuart's
You can tell that one after the
Bible.
camera turned off. Anyway, we got
What?
to do that.
Why?
No, because I'm going to give George 5 minutes
Okay.
to
Well,
do your. It's far more important than my stuff. Immanence of God in the tropics. When he's writing and how he thinks about beginnings, we can't leave without that to our audience. Go
okay.
ahead, tell.
Well,
5 minutes.
the way those kind of beginnings attract me as a writer is that's how I think, and actually a lot of the writers I know think. In other words, rather than sitting with an outline of, I'm going to talk about this unhappy family that I know, an image or a situation, a moment pops up, and then if I like it, I keep on writing with it. And,
You got it. And indeed, he keeps on writing. He's got a whole book about stories. Tell us.
Let him continue.
He's gonna-
He doesn't have much time.
I'm forming a context that they can understand what they're going to hear. Go ahead.
Okay, so I'll read a couple of opening paragraphs, or two or three, which turn into very detailed stories, but the beginning is just the beginning. Mobley kicked the box a couple of times, made a kind of barking noise, and waited a few seconds before picking it up. He was terribly afraid of snakes. You could stumble across them anywhere, like tripping over your own clothes in a morning bedroom. A boy down the road from the mission station had run over a black mamba with his bicycle during the short rains a few months before. The animal bit and the fangs grazed the child's heel, piercing the skin before the snake's body was twisted in the spokes. The boy died within 15 minutes, fallen over the bike at the side of the road, the dead snake caught in the wheel. So
What an image.
So
Memorable.
yeah, this
Right.
the image of a snake, not attacking a walker, but attacking someone on a bicycle.
And
killing.
And you're in a place and time where you're in danger of a snake bite and death on a
so
15-minute basis.
So
It's
that's
really
that's a
an
story
immediate
that started that
sense
way,
of
just
danger. Yeah.
by that image,
Yeah.
and then it goes on to
Give
do
us
it.
another.
So another would be. Let's see here. I'll give the Gloucester story.
Gloucester story.
Even a finished story, because it's going to involve.
Oh,
It's going to be
yeah.
involve a sauna. The sauna after Ted's funeral.
Okay.
This
Is that the actual title?
Yeah, that's
Yes,
the
sauna
title.
after
Ted's funeral.
Okay.
And it becomes a recounting of a story. It's a frame story, which is another way to begin stories. In other words, we were all sitting around, and this guy, so-and-so always used to tell stories, and he's telling a story. So the story ends up taking place mostly in Mexico. But in the sauna after the burial service, Alden dipped into the wrong barrel and poured scalding water on his foot. Jesu Maria, said Squillis. I take some names.
Right.
A pile of boulders sagging down the wooden bench. That'll screw you every time. He shook his head in despair. Willie muttered something in Finnish and drained a bucket from the cold tub over Alden's leg. Now keep it in the water, he commanded. Obedient, Alden thrust his right foot into one of the cold pails and slid his buttocks around to the lower bench. He wriggled his toes. His foot glowed. Nut Brown, freshly stripped, walked in from the changing room. He bowed his head and marched silently to the top bench. There, with great formality, like a justice about to pronounce sentence of death, he dipped a washcloth in the cold water and placed the square on his head. The terry cloth's front corner dripped a rivulet of cool down his forehead to the tip of his nose. On the sauna's upper and lower benches, the four naked mourners sat themselves in two pairs, bellies looming through the mist. You know, said Willie, together we're more than 300 years old. Just the four of us? Well, maybe 250. So.
Hey, not everybody knows. The benches in a sauna are arranged in such a way that the lower one is a little cooler, so the novice or somebody who isn't quite up to this. But if you're on the top bench, you're really something. You're the master of the sauna. Good for you.
So how long is that particular story?
That story goes on for 15, 20 pages.
And this can be, for free, obtained in the Sawyer Free Library to this day. I want to say a couple things.
Your chance.
My chance.
To talk.
Bargain Books has arrived in my house. I see this catalog every couple months. And I must say, speaking of beginnings, that for $6.95, originally $19.95, you can get a book called Ukulele for Beginners. You can begin your adventure with a ukulele for $6.95. And it tells everything about ukulele playing, techniques, even
that would be-
the baffling thing that which ukulele, and there's choices, which ukulele is right for you is in there, the guide.
Well,
And-
I
and great-
now have
great
arthritis in my left hand, and I've been a guitarist, among other things, all my life. But as my left hand has been weakening, a partial solution, which is still in effect now, is to get a
Ukulele.
ukulele, because you
Wow.
don't
Get the
have
book
to
too.
press down
And
so
get the
far.
book too.
Do you
That's
know
right.
about Daedalus Books catalogs?
I do not.
Okay, it's
How-to books?
no, it's like Bargain
it's like-
Books.
yeah.
It's a
That's a
it's
very
a
good,
catalog that comes out every month, I think, or something, and lists hundreds of
Remainders, yes.
remaindered
Wonderful,
books.
the best kind.
Really,
I
great.
always, it's funny, I don't, the new bestsellers are usually not impressive to me. Something that's remaindered, I say, wow, that's really for me. Just telling you, there's a true crime, a bunch of people that read true crime stories and write true crime stories. There's one called A Devil Went Down to Georgia, and it's by Deb Miller Landau, who was normally a reporter or a journalist, but this is her first book. It's a nonfiction book, and it's Race, Power, Privilege, and the Murder of Lita McClinton. And a picture of Lita McClinton, who's black. Her husband, well, I won't spoil it, but there's something to do with the husband. Her husband is Jim Sullivan, originally of Boston, now of what penitentiary is down there in
Georgia? I don't know.
Anyway, or in Florida, I think. I'm sorry. But anyway, I'm just going to, before I begin, I did the Johnny Carson, how would I begin this book if it were my book to begin? And I figured out, I said, I know how I would begin. I would begin with the doorbell ringing because somebody's coming, and with flowers for the lady. And believe me or not, yes, I guessed correctly. And it's called, look at this chapter, George will verify, chapter 1.
Yep, the doorbell rings.
The doorbell rings, and it's the Friday, it describes what day it is and so forth and why she's nervous. And today she goes to court for her divorce that's upcoming from Jim Sullivan. And it's around 8:15 when the doorbell rings. Lita wonders who it could be so early in the morning. She tightens her robe and heads downstairs to answer the door. I'm not going to read more. You'll have to get it to read more and understand. There's a whole circuitous bunch of stuff that happens, investigating and eventually prosecuting and convicting and so on.
So why did you choose this book?
Why did I choose this
Yeah.
book? Because at the library they have something called Book Pages. And Book Pages is about a 10-page giveaway, handout, free, that you can look in and say, this is recommended, so forth. And I said, well, now that I've written a true crime story with a co-author about the murder of a Finn in Rockport, 77 Main Street. Anyway, I said I might as well see how people actually do write those books, other than me, who's a total amateur. And this is the one that was recommended. And I said, this has got to be good. And it is good. You will like it if you read it. Now, meanwhile, we're at the end of the beginning on our show. And next time, we'll see you happily in session on other books and writings all the time. Keeps changing, like the tide, like the water in the harbor. Thank you and good luck. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Tuolla Lontoossa Jennin mä kohtasin. Halo Vepi, oho. Hän on neidosten joukossa kaunihin. Halo Vepi, oho. Suukon kirsikkas silmät niin mustat kuin yö. Ja ne loisti kuin tuikkiva tähtien työ.